Hello again. Welcome to Sisters in Scripture, and today's focus will be on Martha. Martha as in Martha and Mary, Martha the sister of Lazarus, and Martha of Bethany, the woman who welcomed Jesus and his followers into her home. But today we're going to go off the grid. We're going to talk about some other possibilities for Martha that you've probably never considered. In fact, today I am going to tell you a story, a once upon a time kind of story, a fairy tale kind of story, if you will. And so it goes back to that age when fairy tales were popular and rampant. Goes back all the way to the Middle Ages. Now, during the Middle Ages, hagiography was a very popular story form. What is hagiography, you may ask? Well, hagiography is stories about saints. And these were the social media, the Netflix, the Hollywood, all wrapped up into one of those that day. And the most popular collection of saint stories was something called the Golden Legend. This collection was put together about 1260 by Jacobus de Voragine, and it attained and held immense popularity. Now, people didn't read books in those days. Most folk were illiterate, but they were read aloud and then told and retold. Think of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, for example, how important stories are. And the Golden Legend was so popular and so esteemed as to even be revered. It was held to be every bit as true as the Bible and better known, and just as sacred. So its words were true and held that way. These colorful tales, let me show you. Here we have a replica of a page from the Golden Legend. It's a modern one. You can see it's in English. It would have originally have been written in Latin, but it's typical of what it would have looked like in those days for those very few, wealthy few, who could afford to have copies of a book. And the whimsical, wonderful tales that were told in the Golden Legend fueled actual legends, like, for example, the search for the Holy Grail. In fact, these stories inspired cities to rival one another for their patron saints and sometimes to go to war with one another to acquire relics to these saints that, of course, fed the pilgrimage industry. Now, we may, all these years later, take a jaundiced look, a bemused look at these phantasmagorical stories and the adventures that they fostered. But there is sometimes a kernel of truth or a gem of wisdom to be found for the seeker. And one of my favorite stories is the one about Saint Martha and the dragon. In the Golden Legend, Martha and her sister Mary and their brother Lazarus all decide to leave the Holy Land, and they climb into a little rudderless boat, no rudder, no sail, no oars, and they cast themselves upon the whim of the sea and the grace of God. And they are, of course, miraculously guided and encounter many adventures. Now, this painting is by Giotti. It's an illustration of the Golden Legend. There's more than one thing going on in the scene, so I can't begin to explain all of it to you, let alone why there were 5 in the boat. I couldn't figure that out myself. But this is Martha, Mary, Lazarus, etc. on the Mediterranean Ocean. And eventually the Mediterranean coughs them up on the shores of Marseille, France, where their various adventures ensue. Now, these legends become the stuff of local adventure, and various locations throughout Europe, especially in France, still foster popular devotions to these stories and bear their names. This statue is in Tarascon, France. It's near Avignon. And Tarascon is the city in France, a little village that claims for itself the locale for the story of Martha and the dragon. Now, anyone who knows anything about the Middle Ages and their stories knows that there are a great number of dragons. Dragons were a terrible problem in the Middle Ages, terrorizing villagers, shooting flames, snorting smoke, and just generally chewing folks up in a single chomp. They did have an upside in that they provided knights with a good deal of job security, as evidenced by that most popular dragon slayer of them all, Saint George, the dragon slayer. Well, in our story, for reasons not apparent, perhaps Saint George was not available. He was pretty much claimed by the British, but at any rate, he wasn't, and there were no other available knights in the locality, apparently. So the French village that was being terrorized by a dragon called upon Saint Martha to come to their aid. And what did Martha do? Did she garb herself in armor? Did she grab the nearest broadsword? Did she climb upon a white stallion? No. She did just what she did when she cast herself upon the sea. She said a prayer, and she trusted in the providence of God. She grabbed a cross, a vial of holy water, and asked for directions to the dragon. Well, she happened upon said dragon in mid-chew of a hapless villager, which proves how truly dangerous dragons in general, and this dragon in particular, can be. She approached, cross held high, confident of the power of God. She sprinkled holy water upon the beast, and he cowered before her. And then, taking her girdle, she wrapped the ogre with it. And she marched him triumphantly back to the village, shamefaced and submissive, for the villagers themselves to deal with. Da, 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 da. And therein lies the moral and the genius of this story. She does not go about slaying dragons for others. Rather, she tames them enough for them to deal with themselves. Deal with your dragons, says Saint Martha. Now, if in your closet you happen to have a knight in shining armor who will slay your dragons for you, well then, good for you. But if you don't, may you have a Martha in your life who will say a prayer and tame your dragon just enough for you and your dragon to learn to coexist. And may you live happily ever after. The end.